Welcome back, everybody, to the A Little Less Fear podcast, the Dr. Lino Show. Today, I would love to welcome back Tina Erwin for the fourth time on A Little Less Fear podcast. She is the author of 8 books on metaphysics. Her writing comes from an intense desire to know and understand the hard science behind the unseen world of action and reaction, combined with a sincere desire to share this understanding with other knowledge seekers. And today's topic, we will be discussing psychic men. Fascinating topic. Welcome back to A Little Less Fear podcast.
Thank you so much, Lino. I look forward to this so much.
Me too. You know what's interesting? You know what's interesting about this topic? The first thing that comes to my mind is that I feel that, and this also comes from just also my own personal bias of what I feel when I think of psychics. They tend to be a lot of women, and there's rarely men psychic. However, I have been seen on social media, and even one of my best friends, he's also a male psychic. But it just seems like the history has shown a lot of women psychics, and that it's like almost like a feminine thing to be a psychic. Is this true throughout history?
I believe that women are more comfortable talking about it than men. I believe that women use different terminology than men. It's the same thing. If you feel something, you feel it.
Right.
And women love to talk about it. Men don't want to be labeled in any way as airy-fairy. And I get that completely. It feels as if you are somehow discounted if that term is used. But the truth is, you can't drive a car without being pretty psychic. I've talked to both my sons about this because they're car guys. I mean, my oldest son is a mechanic. I mean, he fixes, you name it, he can fix it from Rolls Royce and Bentley to a VW Bug. I mean, that's what he does. And you can feel when there's something wrong on another level with a car. And he talks about being in traffic and just feeling like this guy's going to change lanes. So he backs off, avoids an accident. I frankly believe, and this has got to be true with truck drivers, they're reading body language. They're reading an energy that comes from the car or the truck or the motorcyclist that they're not conscious of. And they wouldn't label it as psychic. They just have a gut feeling. It's the same thing. And if men didn't honor and listen to that gut feeling, I'm here to tell you there would be a whole lot more accidents and disaster. So for all the men who listen, bravo, great job.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that. Now, you said something, gut instinct. Now, what's the difference between gut instinct and intuition? Is this the same thing?
It's absolutely the same word. I mean, it's just theme and variation of the same concept. And for some people, it's like it's like a cloak they wear of sensors. It's like if you had a primitive cloak with all these little feelers on it, it would be sensors that you could sense and feel. Well, I believe that men have those, and they're so in tune with their profession, they can feel when something's off.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't always communicate that. I mean, if there was be a fault, it is that they don't always communicate what they're sensing and feeling in a way that maybe other people around them can understand. But for a lot of guys, they're in if you're a truck driver, long haul truck driver, holy Christmas, you have to be psychic. You see the craziest things, especially on I-70. Oh my gosh. Or you're driving Southern California. It's crazy there. So you have to have that focus and that sensitivity to keep yourself and your rig and the traffic around you safe, because people do really stupid things.
Now, when you're saying the terminology is interchangeable, you're saying that even the word psychic and intuition is the same thing.
Yes, it is.
Okay, I understand that.
They're synonyms for each other.
And so with your knowledge and your experience in metaphysics, or even just observation itself, would you say that men are more psychic intuitive than women, or is it about the same?
I think it's equal across the board. I don't think one is more than the other. I think that we might have a focus in a different way, but when I'm driving, I can feel this guy's going to change lanes. He's going to cut in front of us. I can just feel it coming. And so my husband feels things differently. Just because one partner feels one thing and one doesn't feel it, doesn't mean one is right or one is wrong. If you're kind of driving with your spouse or partner, you're looking out for each other. Maybe someone didn't see something. Maybe you see something out of the corner of your eye they didn't see. Or you can sense something you can't explain, or you hold back, you listen. And I think what we're really saying is sometimes there's this, I'll call it a still small voice in your head that says, wait, be patient, hang back, just wait. And I think men are so used to doing it, they don't even have a label for it. It just lives within them.
Would you say, or I mean, as you're saying this, I'm feeling that maybe that even the types of intuition or the types of way of tapping into the psychic ability could be different comparing masculine and feminine energies. For example, what I'm thinking is right now you're demonstrating a lot of examples with driving and vehicles, but what about other things such as raising children or protecting children, things that more quote unquote a little more naturally maternal? Would that be a different type of intuition that a man could not type into that a woman could, or would you still see that being the same?
I believe it has to do with the rhythm of life. When a woman is with children day after day, you have a natural rhythm with that child, with that personality. If especially with babies, if you have carried a baby for 9 months, or if you're an adoptive mother and you feel that child, you have a sense, I feel the baby is cold. I mean, oh, I feel like the child's awake now. I should go check on him. I mean, there's a fascinating story of a woman who had a feeling that she should grab her child from the room where the child was. And she picks the child up, and as she enters the next room, the chandelier falls and would have killed the child. She has
Wow.
no idea why
Oh
she
my
picked that kid up.
goodness. That's incredible.
Would a man have said if he had been there? I don't know. Maybe the voice would have spoken to the guy and he would have done the same thing. But it's very difficult to know. And I think that men have been told things as well. And I'll give you an example. My husband told me many years ago, he was captain of an oil rig in the right off the coast of Brazil. And on an oil rig, you have 30 days on, it's 28 days on and 28 days off. That's the cycle. Because the stress on an oil rig is so tremendous, you have to have absolute focus. So the 28 days is what they've calculated is the most a person's body can handle. And there are some women who are on rigs, but most of them are men. And he was captain of this rig. And his counterpart captain, because you have like a day of turnover, and then the ongoing captain leaves and the incoming captain's got it. So the captain was Norwegian and told this story. This is before my husband got to this rig. And in this story, he said, I was flying back to Norway from Rio de Janeiro, and I was flying Air France. And I'm getting on the plane, and, Transocean makes the arrangements. Transocean, by the way, is an astonishingly amazing company. They're very good to their people, surprisingly good and generous to their people. It doesn't matter what your rank or rate is. They've been a very good company. So he's flying back to Norway. So he got an Air France flight, and he's going from Rio to Paris to Oslo. Simple. And he gets up and he doesn't feel right. He says, that nagging feeling, something's off. What is it? He can't put his finger on it. And I liken that to trying to tune an old radio set to get that signal to come
To get
in,
that clarity.
get that clarity of that signal. And so he goes to the airport and he's walking up to the desk, and he's walking to the desk slower and slower. And the closer he gets to the desk, the higher his anxiety level gets.
Wow.
And it gets worse and worse and worse. And so he gets to the desk and he turns around, walks out of the airport, takes a cab back to the hotel off Copacabana Beach, calls the company and says, I couldn't get on the plane today. Can you make me a reservation for tomorrow? And they said, sure, no problem. So this man was not on that Air France flight that went down in the Atlantic.
Holy moly.
And he wasn't supposed to die that day. And of course, his family was expecting him, and they saw that crash, and sometimes it takes a while to get word back overseas that he didn't die that day, that he had that voice in his head that said, I should not get on this airplane. And I'm going to listen to that voice.
Right.
And so he's alive today to tell that story. And this to me is a classic example of a man who had a psychic feeling, gut feeling, intuition, whatever label you want, and he listened, and he's alive today. I think it's fantastic.
That is fantastic. I'm wondering why one person would have this intuition and others wouldn't. You know,
because it wasn't his day to die.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know we talked about doing another show on karma, but there's something called group karma. And sometimes you aren't meant to be part of the group karma. And sometimes it's a group karma of death. And that's what airplane crashes and train crashes and multiple car pileups are. They're group karmic death moments.
That totally makes sense. And that's why he had that intuitive nudge. This isn't your time.
This
and
isn't
he
your
felt
time.
into it and he listened to it and
he turned around.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So then it's yeah, that's fascinating, Tina. So then I'm wondering if men are, so this is more okay. So what I want to get into now is like psychic, as far as psychics that are able to read into ghosts or spirits or the afterlife, or psychic mediums, that is. Would you say that it's also equal as far as men and women go, both genders, that can tap into that dimension?
I know an awful lot of men on a spiritual path.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are some of the most spiritual people I have ever met, who have changed the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a psychic sense. They're operating at a higher spiritual level, and they're helping others along the way. They're not reading from a dogma script.
Right.
And I want to make that point really clearly. I mean, I think this is an excellent question. There are people who come here, there are men who come here who have as much of a spiritual mission as women who come here. And maybe some of them are ministers, but they have a classic dogma and script that they use. Mm-hmm. But there are people who don't operate with that script, who are blazing their own path spiritually, which is what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You're opening up doorways on your spiritual path, and you're taking all of us with you. And I'm seeing more and more men do that. And it means that they have, my opinion, they have a strong sense of themselves. To be blunt, they're manly men. Mm-hmm. They're my kind of guy, because awesome. they have a deep and dynamic confidence in themselves and who they are. And if they have a feeling, it's not an airy-fairy feeling. By God, they believe it. And they're going to go with it. and they really don't care what somebody else thinks. And these men are doing some amazing things. They're wonderful authors. I mean, I'll go back to oh gosh, David Hawkins, who wrote Power versus Force. That's a tremendous spiritual book. And drawing a blank on so many of these great authors, but C.W. Ledbetter in the 1920s, his books are classics today. I've read so much of what he wrote. Dr. George King from the Aetherius Society, his work is epic, absolutely epic. And I mean, there's just so many authors. Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who started biogeometry and has written several books on it and has done lectures. They're remarkable. I am honored to know, I know some of them personally, and some of them I have studied their work for quite a while. And I think it's Don Campbell, who wrote The Mozart Effect. And let us not forget Brian Weiss, who talks about how you can use past lives. He's a board certified psychiatrist. You can use, your study of past lives to heal the traumas that come with mental illness.
Right.
So you have Bruce Goldberg, who has talked about people who are drunk and have 40 or 60 ghosts with them. Raymond Moody has talked about this very thing. So where I'm going with this is you have a lot of men who have taken this topic to another level and educated all of us in an extraordinarily dynamic way. So I hope that answers your question.
It really does. And while you were saying that, I was also thinking of quantum physics, and it seems to be a lot of men involved in quantum physics more than females. And I wonder if that also has something to do with the whole being I guess I almost said more intuitive, but I'm not, I can't make that assumption. But just coming from a different type of intuitive introspection than most females. I mean, is that just my observation or my own opinion, or have you seen that as well?
I think I've seen that as well. I think that's a kind of a general observation. What's happening now with string theory, quantum entanglement, is it all goes back to the ancient Huna tradition of Akka chords. We're all connected. Well,
What? I'm not familiar with that. What's that called?
Akka chords. It's a Huna concept. Huna is a Hawaiian tradition. When you're in Hawaii, you hear about the big kahuna.
Yeah.
Well, the big kahuna was a spiritual master to the indigenous Hawaiian people. And they are the descendants of the original Lemurians who had the most beautiful society. And these basically white magicians in Hawaii, these kahuna masters would explain that we are all connected by something called Akka chords, AKA. Is the root
chords.
Akka chords. And when you look at the word akashic, the first three letters are AKA. And what describes and writes your akashic records are your connections and experiences to every place you've ever been, every person you've ever met, everything you've ever touched, everything you've ever seen or heard or smelled. Those things are connected through this massive set of these Akka chords, which is this what's called Kino Akka substance that comes from your solar plexus and then attaches. This is why people say, oh my gosh, I was right there when that happened. Oh my gosh, because they have a spiritual connection to something. And they feel it more than the person who had never stood in that spot. And that explains that. So that Akka chord is an ancient concept that is recognized in many, many different cultures. That concept is mirrored in quantum entanglement and string theory. What is Akka chord if it isn't the string that attaches everything to all of us.
That's amazing. It's like a universal umbilical cord.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm hoping I made that explanation clear, because people think, oh my God, string theory and quantum entanglement. It's so achingly simple. And what's happening is, for the first time, these astrophysicists, quantum physicists are now seeing and understanding how psychic ability works. It's not airy-fairy. It's hard physics.
It is hard physics. And then going again with this being like almost like a male dominated world.
And
And
it's a male-dominated field. Absolutely, it
yeah.
is.
Uh-huh.
And some of the most amazing white magicians of all time have been men.
Yeah.
And I
I
mean, let's
love
just
this.
say it how it is.
I'm really glad that there's that a lot of these scientists and these these incredible these incredible human beings are now kind of stepping up and realizing or recognizing how psychic abilities work, because I feel that in the past, even just 10 years ago, they would have called a lot of people with high intuitive perspectives being almost crazy, and even giving people mood disorders or personality disorders or something in the DSM and psychiatric manuals. But people are now starting to see that this is real deal stuff that we're dealing with, that we're all cooperating in, and a lot of us not even aware that we have these abilities.
That's absolutely true. And one other thing to keep in mind is that for a lot of men, they may have a psychic experience a couple times in their life that stands out. They may do a lot of subtle things throughout every day or every time in traffic or whatever that feeling is. Women are more likely to track how many they have, unless you're a psychic child and you have so many things happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, one person will have this experience and they never have anything like it again. And are they psychic? Yes. Are they actively seeking psychic experiences? Probably not. Are they interested in the topic? Probably not. They're so freaked out by what happened that they can't wrap their brain around it, but they did it.
Right. Something else
I
I'm
mean,
feeling right now.
mhm.
So women tend to be more empathic. That's what I've noticed, at least a little bit
That's
more.
true. That is very true.
And is empathy not on the same almost frequency or rhythm of intuition and psychic abilities?
Uh,
I know it's a challenging question, but I'm feeling these questions, and I'm wondering how that avenue would go.
you hear a lot of, I mean, I'm trying to be careful how I say things. Many women call themselves empaths.
Hmm.
You see this tremendously with teenage girls and young women. Oh, I'm an empath. I feel what everybody's feeling. If you were horribly abused, your auric field is full of holes. So you're going to feel what everybody around you is feeling. If you have suffered any kind of abuse, you have a vulnerability in your own force field. Well, men work really hard to shore up their force field so that they can project this inner and outer strength. Women are proud of being empaths. I can't think of a single guy who would be proud of saying that. Um, it's women are a conundrum because they want men to be sensitive, but they don't want them to be too sensitive.
Hmm.
They want them to be manly men, but they want them to be sensitive to things happening. And it's you kind of can't have it both ways.
Hmm.
You know, guys see things black and white sometimes. Women see things in 28 shades of gray. So men use whatever their psychic ability is in this ordinary practical situation.
Mm-hmm.
Women are looking for the paranormal. Now, I have an awful lot of guys who are paranormal investigators. They just eat this stuff up with a spoon. They're fascinated by it. Are they empaths? Not necessarily. Do they have incredibly inquiring minds and want to know? Of course they do. I would say more men than women watched Ancient Aliens, or the X-Files. I mean, some of us were glued to it, or Star Trek's.
Mm-hmm.
So, because there was a lot of intuition in Star Trek, a lot of feeling, a lot of sensitivity. You cannot be a good ship captain,
right,
and not be sensitive. You can't. You
True.
cannot run your ship if you're hardwired in just this one rigid way. You're going to have an accident.
Right. That's true. That's so true. And so in women being more okay, so men do have the ability to be as empathic as women, but because of history, I'll just say even maybe the last 200-300 years, men have adapted or evolved to be a little more hard on the outside. But I'm seeing an evolution happening around me, and I see it on social media. I mean, I'm 43, and I can see people, men in their 20s, that are speaking in ways that I never knew that men would be able to speak, very empathically, very emotionally, very nurturing. I'm seeing this evolution of men, and I feel that the roles are starting to change, where women are becoming a little more masculine and men are becoming more feminine. Are you seeing this?
I feel that sometimes we're seeing people meet each other in the middle. I would hate to make a generalization about a population.
Sure.
I feel that men are becoming more curious about things. Women are facing the hard realities of day-to-day life in a business world. They
True.
have to change.
That is so true.
You can't, women, I mean, when I was in the Navy, I had to learn the language of men. And I saw a lot of, younger women get so upset, with how men do things. And I said, but you entered their world. You have to learn their language. They don't have to learn your language. This is their world. Well, I just don't understand. And it was really simple stuff like, I'd say, hey, I'm going to go get a haircut. Hey, see you later. No problem. But if I said, oh, I have a hairdresser's appointment at 4 and, I'm not sure what's going to happen with my hair, they would go, oh my God, what a twit. So both sentences were correct, but men heard the first one in their language, in their vernacular. Hey, XO, I'm going to get a haircut. Well, I said the same thing back. If your kid is sick, you don't go to your boss in the military and say, oh, my child was so sick and I was up all night. Don't care.
Right.
You're going to talk to your male boss and you have a sick kid. You say, I got a doctor's appointment at 2. I'll be back right after that. Hey, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
So you spoke his language and you got a positive reaction because you have to observe, how do men work? And to me, that was one of the most successful traits of successful women. They learned to speak the language men could understand. And we had to change. You can't want something from someone else that it's ridiculous. So if you expect to operate, if I expect to operate working side by side with submariners, I had better learn the language or I'll never be taken seriously.
Sure. That totally makes sense. Wow, that's tough, Tina.
Well, I thought it was so much fun, frankly, because I love languages and I can't say anything but great things about the men I work with. I just thought the world of them. So I did not have the problems other women had.
That's awesome. So going back to psychic men, so what I'm feeling from this conversation is that if we were to go back, I mean, hypothetically, like 2,000 years ago, I'm feeling that both men and women were equally psychic, equally intuitive, but industrialization, technology, roles, labels, all of that have kind of like mixed in the intuitive aspects of gender, kind of just changing that fluidity. Would you understand? Do you understand this?
Yes. Several thousand years ago, we didn't have the interference of electromagnetic radiation. That is a true statement. I mean, because there's people are always looking at something to disagree with, but that's an absolutely true statement. But we also didn't have the problem of the slowness of society. Well, maybe they didn't consider it a problem. If you're living in the middle of it, you don't know it's a problem.
Right.
But what they had was tremendous insecurity. There was always food insecurity. There was safety. A lot of things happened to people 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago at night. There were predators, human and animal.
So true.
And how you secured your home, you had to have a feeling about things. So you really saw this with the Native Americans and the Native indigenous people globally.
Yeah.
They knew how to read the signs of the earth. They developed this strong intuitive sense to read and hear the wind, to look at the rocks, to watch the clouds, to look and feel the ley lines on the earth, to understand how insects work, to look at how plants tell you what's dangerous and what isn't. We lost that ability. But for them, their intuitive sense and their observational sense became one. They wouldn't have separated it. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And actually, as you said that, I thought of the movie Apocalypto. Did you ever see that movie?
I did not.
It's
But
it
I saw
yeah.
Dancing with Wolves, and Dancing with Wolves,
Yeah, that's an excellent movie too.
that
Oh
was
my
a really excellent movie because Kevin Costner had to change. He had to see the world through the eyes of the Native American tribe that that where they befriended each other.
Right.
And he had to change and feel and learn to feel, learn to listen. It's a lot of psychic ability you earn life after life after life. And then in that life where you have this accumulation of a lot of psychic experiences in past lives, now you have to apply it. Sometimes you have to relearn to listen and to develop the discipline to use it correctly. And I think that a lot of Native people simply felt like it lived within them. But when we have so much electromagnetic radiation, so many distractions, listening to that psychic sense is a little bit more challenging.
Now, when you're saying electromagnetic radiation, you're talking about like cell phones and televisions and radio frequencies, all of that
And
stuff.
all the cell phone towers and everything is constantly watching. I mean, if someone said, I always feel like somebody's watching me. Well, you know, 50 years ago, you'd say, oh my God, you're paranoid. Today, it's like, oh yeah, well, there's a camera on every corner. There's a jillion cameras everywhere. So you are constantly being watched. It doesn't mean you have a ghost,
Right, right. That's incredible. I never really thought of it that way. Another thing I thought of, I consider myself very intuitive and very psychic. I can't imagine how much more I'd be able to hone in on my skills if I didn't have all this electromagnetic waves all around me. That's really incredible. I never thought of this. That's
What
amazing.
happened with Native people is they knew how to listen to the voice and the language of nature.
Love that.
The Native people learned the language. We're up here in Washington State, and our son's property has 500 and 600-year-old trees on it.
Wow.
It's old growth forest. And I studied biogeometry and how ley lines exist on the earth. And for the first time on an untouched piece of property, except for a dirt road, you can see where one line starts and another line where it starts and stops. You can see how the deer use only certain paths, where certain plants start and stop because that ley line stops, because that level of energy isn't there at this next mathematical degree. If you're a Native person, don't build your settlement right here because these stinging nettles are going to just be horrible for you. But if you have an illness, you're going to collect them carefully and brew them and they'll heal you. So you didn't say this is good or bad. You said this is better for living, this is better for healing. And you valued on an equal level everything you saw in nature. A wolf isn't good or bad. A wolf is necessary. An eagle isn't good or bad. It's necessary. I mean, we have a lot of wasps in our yard and we honor them. We just tell them that they're welcome. They're amazing pollinators. So are wasps horrible? I hear so many people angry. Well, if they sting you, yes, but that bee, that bumblebee, the honeybee, the ground bees that we have, all of those, they all have that potential, but they don't need to sting anyone if there's nothing that's harming them.
So true.
And having that benevolent feeling and observing, just sit and watch the rhythm of nature and life. So your intuitive sense kicks in when you know what the rhythm is and something is out of balance. You begin to feel it because you're now tuned in to a whole nother level of understanding of this nature. And I mean, didn't anybody wondered how all of these native people survived for centuries without vaccines and drugs? I mean, come on.
Right.
They did really, really well. Generations and generations of them. Their populations didn't get overdone. They fed themselves, they clothed themselves, they managed winters, and they depended, the men and the women depended on each other for observing and bringing information to the good of the whole.
I love this. This is an incredible topic. And I'm wondering as you're saying this, because I live in Pasadena and it's like a half city, half suburb. And if I go into LA, I feel that it would just be almost impossible to be as intuitive as I can be or as I am when I'm sitting by myself at a park. So I'm just wondering if also just living in hustle bustle areas make it difficult for people to adapt with their intuition and their psychic abilities, whereas people that are more in nature, it becomes a little more natural.
I think that's a very good observation because I feel as if when you have nothing but cement and you are not grounded with physical earth, or we have a lot of area with a lot of clover, which puts nitrogen in the soil. People say, oh, get rid of that, it's a weed. No, it's a nitrogen enhancer. Don't just throw it out, don't just destroy it.
What's
It
a
has a
nitrogen
purpose.
enhancer? A weed, you said?
People say clover.
Oh, clover.
Yeah, it's just some weed. It dramatically improves the nitrogen content of all the surrounding soil.
Mhm.
It's drought tolerant. The deer love it. All these animals love it.
Mhm.
Insects love it. So you are enhancing a balance by studying what happens. But if you are surrounded only by cement, then you can't feel nature. There's a fascinating story of a couple in England who had I don't know, 20,000 acres. I don't know how many, like 80,000 acres or something in this estate they inherited, and they couldn't farm it. Nothing worked. So they said, we're going to give the entire estate back to nature. And they brought in certain animals. And in 10 years, they transformed this property into the most gigantic nature preserved, and animals that hadn't been seen since the 1400s returned.
Wow, that's incredible.
Now they have ecotourism, and instead of being $1 million in debt, they're wealthy now because they appreciated the land, and now they are in complete balance with nature, and it's rewarding them.
That's beautiful. And now
They
I'm thinking,
listened.
yeah, I'll say they listened. And now I'm thinking as you're saying that there tends to be a lot more angrier people in the city. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with it. The fact that they're not as in tune with nature because there's so much concrete going on rather than them being able to feel the electromagnetic grounding energy of the earth. And that can possibly cause people to become a little more irate and more angry and less in harmony with nature and themselves.
Well, it's this subtle nails on a chalkboard feeling inside their auric field that never leaves them. And what happens is you're out of balance. This is the beginning of dis-ease. You're no longer at ease, you're out of ease, you're in dis-ease, which is where all of these terrible illnesses can come from. Because in a lot of native tribes, cancer, tuberculosis, all of these other things were unknown.
Right.
They didn't exist. So I think that when you're looking at balance, we kind of got off psychic guys.
That's okay.
But when you're looking at, if you look at the elders of a tribe, the shamans of the tribe, they were respected. They weren't charlatans. The shamans could feel things. Someone could come to them. They understood all of the nature spirits that surrounded them. And they knew when something was out of balance, how to bring it back to balance, because they could listen. You used to see this with old country doctors. Somebody would bring in a child with an earache, and the doctor might know that there was abuse in the family, and the child had pain in its ear from what it was hearing. Children who there's no fighting, there's no screaming, there's no yelling, they don't ever get ear infections. It virtually doesn't happen because there is no dis-ease in what they're hearing.
Wow, that's so fascinating.
Yeah. Well, that's a Louise Hay concept.
Yeah, I love Louise Hay.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you have a sore throat, what's painful to talk about? When you study metaphysics, you can't just study ghosts. If you truly study metaphysics, you must study what were the native traditions all over the world. How did they handle illness? What things did they use? How did they forage? How did they stay alive? And were they happy? And I would say many of them were very happy. Some of the American settlers who came here, who built relationships with the native peoples who they lived side by side with, and they built friendships. Not everything was adversarial. They learned a staggering amount. The native people in this country, without them, the first settlers would have died of starvation and illness and cold. It was horrific. Most of all the women lost their babies the first several years. It was unbelievable. I mean, I spent a lot of time talking to dead people on the East Coast, so that's what you hear. 400-year-old ghosts were, it just breaks your heart when you hear what they went through. But some of the native tribes members were there for them. It wasn't always adversarial.
Right. Man, this is all just so incredibly fascinating. So what is something important that you think the world needs to know about psychic men?
I think that a manly man is really psychic. I think he is at peace with himself, and he respects the still small voice he hears. And it doesn't matter whether he goes to church 4 times a week and twice on Sunday. If he's hearing something from his higher self or from the divine, then that's what he's hearing that says, slow your ship down, or take over here, or let's change this. And if that guy does his job, lives will be saved. I have a story about that if you have an extra minute.
Sure.
There was when I was in the Navy, this was in the 70s, there was a very interesting story of a fast attack submarine that was operating in what's called the Autek Range, which is the tongue of the ocean. And this is a range, it's a long trough, like a V, that runs parallel to the east coast of the United States. And an awful lot of activity happens there with submarines. And so this submarine was, doing testing, and they were all ahead full, and they were, operating in this trough. And this lieutenant is due to take over the watch. And he wakes up in a cold sweat, jumps out of bed, goes over to the watch and said, I relieve you now. And the guy says, yeah, but I got another 20, 30 minutes. He says, no, I relieve you right now. And he said, all right, dude, I don't know why you want the watch. He says, no, I got the watch. The guy, the watch leaves, the new watchstander takes over and says, all back full, right full rudder right now. so that when this submarine collided into the side of a mountain in the Autek Range, because instead of running parallel to the mountain, they were running at a direct course.
Oh my
So
goodness.
by his waking up 30 minutes early and going all back full, he slowed the change. And when he did right full rudder, it was a glancing blow and no one died. And of course, he was court-martialed because he was the watch and he didn't get permission. And in that moment, he listened. God bless his heart. During the court-martial, the captain, the XO, and the navigator were also court-martialed, and their careers went in the tubes. He was completely exonerated, and no one could explain why he did what he did. That was quietly ignored. But he saved 125 men because he listened.
Or it was also their karma to not die.
It was their karma to not die. And he played his part beautifully.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that's amazing. Tina Erwin, everybody, just always so fascinated by Tina's wisdom, knowledge, and I can't wait to have you back to talk about karma. It's going to be a fascinating topic. How can our viewers, our watchers, and our listeners find you if they need to get a hold of you, if they have any questions, all of the above?
Thank you, Lino. You can contact me at contact@ghosthelpers.com. You can hear podcasts on Amazon, look up Ghost Helpers podcasts. And I, love hearing from people, and I hope you love these podcasts as much as I love doing them. And it's a great opportunity to share, because one of the spiritual laws is if you have this information, you're required by spiritual law to share it. So, Lino, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
It's my honor, and whatever I can do to honor these spiritual laws, I'm here. I'm an open book and open door policy for you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate you.
I love you too.
Thank you so much. Keep in touch.
All righty.